Yeah, we're good.
Give her on a second, he's just having some technical challenges. Yeah.
Yep, thanks.
We're good.
Good to go.
Good to go. All right. It's 5:46. I'll call this finance meeting to order. The town of Aurora acknowledges that the Anishinaabe lands on which we live and work are the traditional and treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island, as well as many other nations whose presence here continues to this day. As the closest First Nation community to Aurora, we recognize the special relationship the Chippewas have with the lands and waters of this territory. They are the water protectors and environmental stewards of these lands, and as a municipality, we join them in these responsibilities. We further acknowledge that Aurora is part of the treaty lands of the Mississaugas and Chippewas recognized through Treaty Number 13, as well as the Williams Treaties of 1923. A shared understanding of the rich cultural heritage that has existed for centuries and how our collective past brought us to where we are today will help us walk together into a better future. Sure, I can get a motion to approve the agenda. Councillor Weiss, Councillor Thompson, all those in favor? Opposed? That carries. Any declarations of pecuniary interest? Seeing none. Okay, a motion to receive the minutes of April 9th, 2024. Councillor Thompson, Councillor Weiss. Any comments or questions on that?
No.
All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. No delegations. We have two matters for consideration. First one, 7.1, it's a memorandum from Financial Management Advisor regarding water and wastewater rate study update. Who'd like to start?
I'll
Rachel?
start. So we
Go ahead.
do have some slides, so Emily's just putting those up.
These are the ones that.
Yeah, the ones on the agenda. So as you know, we came to council a while ago. It was a public meeting just to gather some feedback on the water wastewater rate study. We did get some feedback at that meeting. So the rest is the word there. I'd also like to say before we start, the person who did most of the work on this is actually Sandy. So kudos to her. So we can go to the next slide. So we're going to give a bit of an overview of the current rate structure and some of the information relating to how we're charging for water wastewater rates, and then what we're looking at proposing going forward. So we've added another option in there, considering some feedback from the public. So when we look at the existing customer base, we've got about 18,000 customers, and currently have about 811 that are inactive, and that can change from time to time depending on the seasonality of the crop. Aurora's on average consuming about 5.5 million cubic meters, and we recover about $30 million overall between water and wastewater. The current structure we have is we charge a rate for water and wastewater on a per cubic meter basis. So these are what our average water and wastewater rates are for this year. Slide. We decided to take a look at the overall residential consumption, and this just gives you an overview as to what it looks like for the picture of Aurora and where like the main consumption is actually within the group. So you can see a lot of it happens in that midsection there between 125 and 250 cubic meters annually. And then there are some of those outliers that are consuming significantly more water, more than 425 cubic meters. But they're the smaller. Commercial consumption on the next slide. So as you can see, most of the commercial consumption is on the lower end of the spectrum. This is more like some of the retail and small businesses. And then you end up with some more significant consumption when you get to some of the larger organizations within the town. Next slide. So the challenges with the existing rate structure is the inactive customers are currently not paying for anything, so they're not contributing to the cost of the infrastructure. So that includes vacant homes that we could have within Aurora. So the proposed method of having a standard cubic meter charge does not encourage consumption, particularly for the residential consumers. And the revenues are 100% dependent on the level of consumption. So that can vary from year to year, depending on how wet it is and how people need to water their lawns. And that can impact our ability to collect for reserves, particularly for asset management. So, next slide. So what we did was we looked at a third option. The first option here is what we currently do. We charge for each cubic meter that is used by a consumer, and it's the same rate, no matter how many cubic meters that they use. If a home is vacant or no one is consuming water, they do not pay anything. Option 2 is the one that was presented at the public meeting. 30% of our cost roughly is the fixed costs that we have, so mostly the town-borne costs that we have. And then the 70% variable, that's pretty much is what we pay to the region for the servicing of water and wastewater. So we pay them on a per cubic meter from what we consume for the town. We looked at creating a third option, and this third option also incorporates that fixed rate, which would still cover Aurora's costs, including the infrastructure costs. So that fixed rate ensures that we're collecting the amount of money that we intend to collect for asset replacement reserves and things such as that. Then we looked at creating a 2-tier, so a variable one for tier 1, which is up to 56 cubic meters. And that would be that was quarterly?
Yearly,
Yearly.
quarterly around 20 cubic meter.
Okay, so 56 cubic meters annually, and then that encourages people to conserve and in the water they consume, and then charging a higher rate beyond that. So when we looked at this, we have to recover all our costs. We wanted to take an example of what some of the bills would look like around the town. So we looked at took examples of some consumers that we have. So Emily, next slide. So we wanted to promote the fairness to all residents. We wanted to look at how it impacted different types of residents. And we also wanted to encourage some conservation. So those, this last slide here, those sort of numbers are quite small on this last one. But we took a few examples of different accounts that we have. So we have like a residential family of 4, a retired residential, and retired typically are home all day, so they do consume a little bit more water. And then we look at residents with pools, ones with irrigation systems, ones with irrigation and pools, and then some of the commercial ones as well. And then we looked at the 3 different options. So what we're finding here is under the variable option, like the biggest to looking at the option was presented by the consultants to this new third one with the 2-tier. We can see that for the average residential, it doesn't change too much. There's a little bit of change, a little bit of savings depending on the type of consumption they have. There is a bigger savings for that commercial customer that has high consumption, but we also make sure that when we have those residences that are not consuming water, they're still paying for their infrastructure costs and the fixed costs of delivering the water service. So that's where we're picking up some of that additional revenue. So it has a bit less of an impact overall on an average for the residential customers looking at this 2-tier within a fixed and volumetric rates. So what we wanted to do is come here and just get some feedback from Finance Advisory Committee, get your thoughts on what you think about these various options as well before we go back to council.
Any questions, Michael?
Just if you don't mind putting that last slide back. So I'll start there.
Yep.
Besides the obvious one about we need to change the spelling of tier. Forget about the obvious one, but
Someone's left hand's faster than the right.
yeah, put that slide up. Thanks. So just so I understand, so the column, the 100% variable, that's what the residents would pay today,
Yes,
right? So
That's
that's
what
the
they're paying
2024 rates that residents would pay today. Under the proposed structure, they're going to save money? Because it looks like.
very slightly,
Well,
depending on
but
the
I
type
mean-
of use.
But in each category, it looks like if we change it up, there's gonna be a savings, so doesn't, somewhere, we still have to get to the same bottom line number. Is it all being made up through the vacant home?
So
Because
some,
you look at it, I mean, for example, you
Yeah.
know, the residential home, with a pool, without a pool, commercial, all of those figures are less if you chose the fixed category versus the variable, so there it appears to be a savings, so where's the makeup?
Through you, Chair. So there's two areas where you have some of that makeup. So part of it is the vacant homes. We do have 811 inactive accounts that are not paying anything. So that's part of where it makes it up. It also depends on the consumption, because if you look at that last option, the residential water meter with 257 cubic meters of usage, they end up paying a little bit more. So there's some of these are like a little bit less and some of them are a little bit more, but overall we end up in a similar place. Also, when you look at the commercial one, that does have a significant change, but we don't have many that are actually consuming that amount of water. Because that's, as you saw with the profile of the users of water, there was very, very few that were on that high consumption end.
And so, you know, I support the idea of the vacant homes also contributing to the recovery of the infrastructure costs. I think makes sense to me. Should share, use it or not, certainly from the infrastructure, they need to pay their fair share. So the first row and the last row, to me, they're both the same. The only difference is consumption. So in the first row, the average consumption is 311 meters squared. If we would, the change from variable to either the fixed rates is a savings. But then the last column, there's an increase, even though we're only talking about a difference of roughly, 60 cubic meters of water. Is that because of the rates versus the fixed and the lower price that you're trying, that's sort of like the threshold where they switch?
So through you, Chair, is because that first portion of the bill is that fixed component.
Yeah.
So 30% of our cost is going to be in that fixed charge to start with. So that is going to be there. And that's why we wanted to take a look at that additional option of a 2-tier volumetric rate. So that those with lower consumption weren't going to get hit as hard as what they would have if we just do a single one. Either one is a reasonable option, but that's why we wanted to provide another way of looking at this, but we just, again, wanted to get that.
Yeah, I think, I mean, just, I guess intuitively, I kind of like the idea of the variable rates, the 2 tiers with a lower price for the basic consumptions, in terms of however, I mean, I think that it'd be important when you bring it to council to provide some background on how you determine what that basic consumption number was, but yeah, it makes sense to me that it seems reasonable.
And the other reason we looked at that 2-tier was for affordability for basic needs. Because that fixed cost was going to bump up the burden a little bit, otherwise with a single rate. So we thought if we encourage some conservation, it provides for basic needs of water.
You good?
Yeah.
Ron?
Like you, I think it's the right thing to do this fixed and variable. Did you do a little bit of a sensitivity analysis on our existing usage to come up with these particular annual consumptions? And really where I'm driving at here is how many of our residential users are going to see some benefits out of this? Did you look at that to see what percentage of water rate, wastewater people are going to say, oh, this is great, I'm paying less than I was last year?
Rachel?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we didn't get into that level of detail, but we could probably overlay something on that with the bar charts that we have when we bring it back to council, so you can get a sense of what it looks like. What we did for this was, the main reason was we wanted to look at different types of customers. So we picked examples of customers throughout the town. So just to give us a better sense of what it looks like for the different areas, but we can expand upon those bar charts and maybe show the before and after with a line as to where it looks like.
I think if you gave a couple of examples of this kind of consumption versus this versus this, and I think the residents would look at this and say this is very fair. And I don't think anybody's going to conclude the vacant homes being charged the fixed rate. Have you, through you, Chair, has this been tested elsewhere, or is this something that has been done in other municipalities and has been kind of pass the smell test, so to speak.
Let's pass this one to Sandy.
Yes, all the neighboring municipalities, especially Newmarket, they have a variable and a fixed charge.
Right. There's no, through you, there's no selection. I would like to go variable, I'd like to go fixed. I'd like to take this or that, it's just all, you get what you get because of your water consumption. Fixed rates are what they are, and then the water consumption is the only thing, whether you're getting it, you're conserving or whether you're not conserving.
Yes, that's
Rachel?
correct. Yeah, through you, Chair, if we were to set up a different method for charging for water, it would be done the same for everyone. We'd also be wanting to make sure that when we implemented it for our May billings, because then that way we ensure everybody's being fairly changed to the new method.
It's good. It's fair. That's it for me.
Michael, second time?
So just go back to that question about, I guess where the line is for residential homes in terms of seeing an increase or a decrease. So in the report itself, it says that in option 3, the fixed with two-tier variable rate, a town resident with the annual consumption of higher than 298 cubic meters will see a reduction. So is that sort of the threshold there? So based on their usage, for those residents that annually use less, they would see a slight increase.
Yes,
More, right?
at 298 cubic meters was the break-even point where,
So, and when I go back to that graph, which showed the residential consumption pattern, it appears to be that the vast majority of residents use less than 300 cubic meters. So the switch in this system would actually generate an increase for the majority of residents. Is that accurate?
yes.
Yes, so if we have a majority under that, they would see a slight increase. Which is why we wanted to look at the two-tier option to not make that increase as pronounced for low users.
So is there any more modeling that can be done to say, to change that break even point in terms of, so that, I guess, it's a fairer breakdown in terms of the percentage of overall residents or homes that are impacted? Because so the chart's up on the screen, right? I mean, if 298 is the break even, we're
Yeah, so we.
not the break even point, but the turning point, the vast majority of accounts over 300 are small compared to the vast amount that's before. So I wonder how we can shift that line a little bit. 298 to 250 or something like that, if there's any other modeling there
Yes.
for consideration.
Yeah, so for us to look at that, it's fairly easy with the model that we have. It's a matter of applying a factor on the rate. So it just shifts part of the rate between the low and the higher tier.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in the perfect world,
So we-
you come up with a system that, 50% of the homes see an increase and 50% of the homes see a decrease kind of thing, or some more reasonable numbers. And
Is
so
there-
I would like to know, based on that 298, what percentage of homes or customers are we talking about now? Are we saying that 85% would see an increase and only 15% would see a decrease? Like, what's that actually work out to as a percent of?
I can run that analysis for
Yeah,
you.
so, I mean, I guess that's one other comment is, is we could take a look at it and still like the process that we're going in terms of the two-tier. But is there a way to take a look at those numbers to try and lower the impact of the vast majority?
Yeah, so we can take a look at that, maybe provide a couple of more options for the two-tier and what the rates and the shifting would look like. Okay.
That's it for me.
Ron?
I just thought of it, so we were talking, moving back and forth. In the old way, we buy our water, sell our water, and it's breaking. Is there any risk in this going to this model?
So.
There is, can you tell me what that risk is? Is there a chance that we're going to be in a deficit position in any situation where we're getting a lot of people, getting back to Councilor Thompson saying, Is there a risk in this? If there is, where is it? May it be through you, Chair?
Rachel?
So through you, Chair, so we have had many discussions about this. And we talked about it and theorized and how this would work. So right now, there's a lot of risk in the method that we use because we are very subject to weather patterns. So weather patterns can seriously impact the amount of water that the town uses during the year, because as you know, during summer, that's peak water usage. So if there's a lot of rain, we see lower water consumption. And what that puts at risk now is the amount of dollars that we're able to contribute to reserves. So we would end up seeing a shortfall in our reserve contributions for asset management. Moving to this method where you have the fixed component, the fixed component protects those reserve contributions because that's in the fixed portion that you know you're going to collect on an annual basis. The risk in the volumetric component ends up being our estimate on water loss. So there's some water that we purchase from the region that we don't end up collecting, and we do adjust for that in our volume estimates. And we've been pretty good over the last 3 years in estimating our volume. We're actually pretty close on 2023. So there's a little bit of risk associated with that. Now, what ends up happening is in this new tier method, we're assuming that when we do the model that pretty much most of the customers are going to max out that lower tier piece, right? So they're going to be maxing out on the lower rate, and then the higher rate is going to be maybe understated a little bit. So I think the risk overall is a bit minimal. It's that's kind of protecting against maybe higher water loss than what we would expect.
Okay, now the next thing is it's not like hydro necessarily. I mean, people are used to having breaks on their hydro bills because of the time of use of the rest. It's not like that. And we're not getting the first percentage based on this first 257, and then you click into a higher rate. Your rate is your rate provided that you're at 257. And if you're at 311, you're at a higher rate or whatever. Okay. So it's not a variable rate.
No, it's a
fixed
tiered
for
rate. So you would,
based on your consumption.
yeah, you would pay one rate up to that to the top of that first tier, and then above that, you'd pay then a higher rate.
So it is 2 rates.
It is 2 rates then.
Yeah.
So that's it.
Someone want to move the recommendation? Michael, Ron, all those in favor? Opposed, that carries. Next, 7.2 memorandum from financial management manager regarding the budget review of the finance department and corporate accounts. Rachel?
Okay, through you, Chair. So I think we were supposed to be doing one of our community partners this month, but they weren't quite ready. So I said to Jason, well, let's get finance done and out of the way. So here we are. So there's the two groups here. So we have the finance department, which includes the two finance teams plus procurement and IT. And then we also have the corporate accounts, which is kind of the place that everything that doesn't fit goes. So looking at finance overall in IT, there's a few things that were coded into some of the wrong accounts. You see a little bit of pluses and minuses there. But I think most of the finance area is fairly straightforward. The corporate accounts is a little bit more complex. As previous, like I think Tom and Michael, you know, we changed the way we report on the corporate accounts about a year or two ago to try and clean it up and make it simpler to understand. Part of the challenge of looking at this now is some of the legacy information hasn't been redistributed. It's still in where it used to be, but going forward, as we get more history, it'll be easier to understand as we move forward. I can tell you right now from our team, it's a lot easier for us to understand it now when it's not all just bundled in one bucket. So we've separated it out to try and make it a little simpler. But if you have any questions, we're happy to answer those.
Anybody? Michael, go ahead.
Just gonna go by memory, because my gun's not working that great.
No.
It's doubling it, but so With regards to attachment one, I appreciate you kind of providing some of the highlights. I think the only thing that really stood out for me was the line around maintenance and software costs. So going by memory, so in 2021, it was roughly 400 and some $1,000, and it grew to $1.1 million in 2023. And so when I also look at it with, there's another IT line paid before, just, I guess overall, just the trend of increases with regards to the maintenance and support from IT. And I guess it's a confirmation comment, just not just for you, but also for Doug. Like, I get that everybody's support costs and IT costs are rising rapidly, especially as we get more and more reliant upon them. But I hope as we continue with our IT strategy, is look for alternatives to try and mitigate some of that. And again, continue to explore the N6 ideas to see where there's some sharing opportunities, because it's growing at a rapid rate. I just estimate it's going to continue to grow unless we think that, you know, it's kind of capping out now, but I don't see it as my case.
Rachel.
Mrs. Wainwright back.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So one of the things that's really impacting our software costs in particular is the movement from on-premise systems to cloud-based systems. So cloud-based systems with subscription fees are much higher because you've got subscription fees, hosting fees, and licensing, which are ongoing operating costs, whereas in the past, a lot of these things would be captured in capital because you'd be having them servers and everything on premise. So that is impacting things. The other thing that's impacting that line in particular is we are starting to provide a lot more online services for residents as well. So they're able to access more services through the website. And as we do that, it does have an impact on those costs in particular. So we've implemented a number of things recently, including in the planning and building areas, and also with the new financial system as well. So those costs do impact overall.
And I think overall, I mean, it's good, but at the same time, you see the rapid rise or the escalation of it, and it continues to go at that pace. I just want to make sure that we're also looking at exploring different strategies to try and either mitigate some of those costs or to share those costs if possible with other partners. I mean, we talked about this in the past, even cloud storage, things like that. I mean, you know, everybody's paying for similar costs. Is there opportunities for us to all look at a way to kind of mitigate that from an IT perspective? And just trust that's part of those conversations.
Yeah, part of those conversations are going on with the York Info partnership.
Yeah.
Recently, one of the areas that we did have the discussion about was particularly with Microsoft licensing. So to see if there's anything that we can do, even maybe not on the licensing, but on some of the managed services that we get through Microsoft, because we all use
Yeah.
Microsoft products.
Yeah.
So we are exploring those avenues as well.
Great. Well, I think that was my only comment with respect to that. Thanks.
Ron?
Yeah, just it has some contracts in here, so the implementation of the IT strategy, is that going to go away as implementation, or is it continuing on?
Rachel?
Through you.
Through you,
Sorry.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So a lot of the IT strat plan that was done in 2019, many of the items that are in there are complete. We did have the report that I think was that went forward, identifying what is complete. There are some items that are going to end up coming forward as we look at doing the next strat plan. So in 2025, we'll be looking at reevaluating that strategic plan. And one of the big things is the last strategic plan was all about setting a foundation, a strong foundation for IT. This one's going to be the one that can actually move us forward and let us advance further into where we can invest strategically in IT.
Okay. And in here, you also have a number of statements about transfers from reserves and to reserves. So can you explain a little bit more about that? Because in some cases, it's rather significantly high. And I'm just wondering where.
Attachment 2?
Yeah.
Okay. So particularly in attachment 2, there's a number of areas where there's some transfers to reserves
Right.
that relate to, so I'll start with, let's see, debt management. So for example, the contributions from developers is contributions from the development charge reserves, and those are to pay for development charge funded debt. So Then when you get into some of the other transfers to reserve for reserve management, those are asset management contributions. So that's part of that, that funds our capital projects. Okay? When we get into, the financial items, it gets a little bit more complicated with some of the transfers to reserves because that's actually a surplus distribution. So what ends up happening is at the end of the year, when we have our overall operating surplus, we do an entry to then distribute the surplus funds to reserves based on our surplus deficit management policy. And then that's why you see some of these big swinging numbers in that area.
And some other obvious things around benefits and things of that nature that were just things probably not control. No, that answers two questions I had.
Michael?
Just one last question, with regards to penalties on taxes. Is this the actual revenue that we capture or just that we're charging? And it talks about, on the last page, I mean, it's $1.4 million is forecast. I get it, it's on arrears, but I'm curious whether there's a receivable that goes with it, or is this actual revenue that we've captured? We're still, and there may be more outstanding.
So
Rachel?
through you, Mr. Mayor, so this is the penalties that we've actually billed against taxes.
Yeah.
But as you know, not everyone pays their taxes.
Exactly, that's my question.
However, these are not discounted off, like we don't cancel them off their bills, right? So what happens is if somebody is charged penalties on taxes, and if they don't pay their bills after a while, we'll be moving into tax sale process. Now, we've had tax sales on hold through the pandemic. They were told we couldn't do them. We've had them on hold because of recently with the financial system, we need to dedicate a lot of resources to that. We are going to be bringing forward some information about starting to proceed with them in the fall. So that's going to start bringing down the penalties and taxes, especially when we start looking at some of these ones with larger and older balances and moving them forward to tax sale. Typically what happens then is you send out the notifications and you get a bunch of checks come in because they realize it's getting serious.
So this is amounts only. Sir.
It's probably a mix.
Yep, okay.
Anyone else?
Nothing for me.
Ron?
No, I'm good.
Motion to receive? Michael, Ron? All those in favor? Opposed? That carries. New business? Michael? Ron? Okay. Motion to adjourn? Ron, Michael, all those in favor? Opposed? That carries. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.